1970, in April 22nd, was the first Earth Day. It's the first time it was celebrated, and it was really principally an American, I don't want to say demonstration. It was a celebration of the Earth, but it was also a call to action. A call to action about what was happening to the environment at that time. We had rivers in eastern North America that were so polluted that they were catching fire. We had unbelievable air pollution here in Los Angeles. The sky today is completely different from what it would have been in the 1970s. We had destruction of forests and natural habitat and loss of species. And that's why people then came out into the streets by the millions in the United States to celebrate the environment, but to call for action. And one of the results of that was the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. It mobilized people to care about the environment. By 1990, Earth Day had become an international day, with over 140 nations celebrating and calling for action to protect the environment. Billions of people involved in Earth Day from the 1990s forward. So we are following a long legacy, not as old as the Republic of Sri Lanka, but over 50 years of Earth Day celebrations and Earth Day calls to action. But one thing that we would have felt was missing from Earth Day in 1970 was the specter of climate change. That really wasn't in people's minds in 1970 when the first Earth Day occurred. But if we look here, and there's a picture from New York Times of the streets of New York filled with people in April 1970 for Earth Day. Overlaid that then is what's happened with temperature from that time. This is from 1990. From 1970 to today, global temperature has increased about 1.28 degrees Fahrenheit or about 0.72 degrees centigrade. We are now predicting that by the end of the century, it would have increased by somewhere between 3 to 4 degrees from the temperatures that they would have experienced in the late 20th century. That was not on people's minds on the first Earth Day, but it is firmly on people's minds today as we reflect upon the status of the planet Earth. If we take a look then, it's not just temperature that's going up, and this is the year 2000, that's the year 2100. The increase in greenhouse gases, and the gray line here is CO2, it's indisputable. We can measure it day by day, year by year. We can measure it back in time by looking at air bubbles and ice cores. We know that we have increased the CO2 in the atmosphere more than it's ever been for over 600,000 years. We know at our current trajectory, by the end of the century, it will more than double from where it is today. That will cause increased heating, and we'll see global temperatures which will go up somewhere between 3 to 4 degrees. That's the trajectory we are on today. That will also lead to the melting of ice in Antarctica, Greenland, and on mountain ice caps in places like the Himalaya, and that will raise the world's ocean level. Somewhere maybe a meter, some people would say 2 meters. Could be over my head in terms of sea level rise. And so these are important questions that we face. But we cannot divorce that from thinking about the economy, about our ability to adapt or our ability to mitigate the effects of increasing greenhouse gases and climate change. And this is what we see also happening, and this is very, very important. First of all, projections of the economic impact of climate warming are not good. They suggest that we will see a decrease in gross primary production, a gross domestic product, moving into the 21st century as we face more and more climate challenges. That will decrease our ability to sort of pay for, mitigate, and adapt to climate change. In addition, we're seeing something else happening. We're seeing the difference between the richest countries in the world and the richest individuals in the world and the less rich countries of the world increasing and increasing. So we're seeing a concentration of the funds, the money, the capital that we would use to fight climate change, increasingly being focused in a smaller and smaller proportion of the world's population. And as we'll see, a smaller geography of the world's population. This is the top 1% of earners and the bottom 50%. By the end of the century, the top 1% will own 8 times more in terms of resources and capital than would be the case for the bottom 50%. So we're seeing a concentration of money away from people, and that's the money we need to fight climate change. So we cannot divorce climate change from the economy. Now, if we map out then, where will be the countries most sensitive to increasing climate change as we move through the 21st century? As we look at where the bite will be hardest, what we can see is it's typically the tropical regions, what's sometimes called the global south. And within that, of course, we have the beautiful country of Sri Lanka. The northern countries, the impacts of climate change may not be so severe, and they have capital, resources to adapt and mitigate. But when we look at the distribution of capital and resources in equatorial and tropical regions, we find it's not there. And so this was a study by the University of Notre Dame, and they basically mapped out then ability or vulnerability to climate change. Green is less vulnerable. The red colors, the oranges and the yellows, those are the countries which are vulnerable. And you can see it's not a random geography. And according to their analysis, Sri Lanka would be somewhere in intermediate in terms of its vulnerability compared to other countries in the tropical region. So there's a geography to this that we have to be aware of. Now, if we take a look at Sri Lanka itself, what's happening in Sri Lanka? What's going on in Sri Lanka? And first of all, of course, unbelievably beautiful country, unbelievably diverse country. Mangrove, corals at sea level, mountains 8,000 to 9,000 feet, dry vegetation, rainforest, cloud forest, and also very, very abundant. Very, very abundant in terms of agricultural resources. What we see from that first Earth Day, about 1970, the population of Sri Lanka has about doubled. It's over 22 million people right now, about 22 million people roughly. So it's about doubled in that time period. So there's more people there. Just a little factoid for you. The density of population in Sri Lanka versus the United States, about 10 times denser. The 10 times more people per kilometer, per square mile in Sri Lanka than the United States. So there is a wonderful population of people that need to be supported in the country and are facing challenges from climate change. And we can see that just as warming has increased in the recent decades, the population growth increased very much since 1970. And so one has to think about, well, we have to support people, we have to keep people healthy and happy, and there's more people, and then we face climate change. Now, of course, we've seen here with the artwork the absolute stunning natural beauty of Sri Lanka, the incredible natural beauty of Sri Lanka, and I hope everyone has a chance to take a look at some of the artwork here. Sri Lanka is very important biologically. It is a recognized international hotspot for biodiversity. There's 189 plant families there. That makes up, almost half of the sort of known plant families we have. There's over 3,000 flowering plant species on the island, 120 species of mammals, 227 different species of birds, 171 species of reptiles, 106 species of amphibians. There's 8 UNESCO World Heritage Sites there and 5 internationally recognized Ramsar wetlands. So, I mean, this is an incredible gift that Sri Lanka has in terms of its biology, ecology, and diversity. And it's important economically for the country. 1.1 million foreign tourists, typically generating in terms of Sri Lankan rupees about 2 billion in 2018. So this is a place where the world comes to share the beauty, to share the biodiversity and the ecology of this wonderful island. But if we look a little bit deeper, there's some other interesting facts. And I will then take my notes out to make sure I get this right. But about 43% of the vertebrates, the reptiles, the mammals, the amphibians, about 43% are endemic. that means they're found nowhere else in the world. They only are found in Sri Lanka. If we take a look at the plants, about 1/4 of those plant species, of the flowering plants, are endemic. They are found nowhere else in the world but in Sri Lanka. And so there's a high degree of endemism in Sri Lanka, species that you will not see anywhere else in the world in the wild. But that also means if those species go extinct in Sri Lanka, they're gone from the earth forever. So it's a gift, but it's a gift that must be protected. And if we take a look then, 41 of the mammal species are considered to be threatened or endangered. So they are facing pressures. They are facing dangers and pressures. What's climate change then doing in Sri Lanka? What can we see there?